Hi, everyone, and welcome to a conversation where teachers are empowered to enhance the learning environment in their classroom. And today we have a very special guest. Today's guest is an author, speaker, and a mentor. He started his career as a teacher, and at the young age of 35 became a principal. He led a whole school's turnaround and also designed and led a brand new school, which is an amazing achievement. And if this isn't enough, it took a challenge of creating his own organization called Real Schools that focus on helping schools with their school's culture. So a big warm welcome to Adam Voigt. Hello, Adam.
Oh, hi, Audel. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. How are you?
Yeah, I'm going well. Yeah, yeah.
One,
Another busy year.
Absolutely, especially after the last couple of years. It's been a
Yeah.
very, very busy year. So there is something I wanted to chat with you today, Adam. And we've been talking as a society for many years about the need to change our education system, how it's broken, how it's not really suitable for the 21st century needs, and how it's not providing children with a learning environment they need today to thrive today and in the future with all the changes in technology and the changes in our world. And even though we're speaking about it for tens of years, and nothing has happened. There is no fundamental change. So I think it's time, instead of waiting for politicians and bureaucrats to drive change within our education system, it's time to empower our teachers to drive this change within the classroom, because they can definitely do so. And so I wanted to ask you, as you have a vast experience as a teacher, as a principal, and with the organization that you currently lead, in terms of how we can empower teachers to do so. So can you share your thoughts on this?
I think you touch on a couple of really important points. And one is that I think you're right. We shouldn't wait. We shouldn't wait for bureaucracies or for governments to decide that they're going to change schools in the favour of young people thriving and teachers being incredibly well respected. We're going to need to work in the opposite direction on that. So we are going to have to look at what our scope is to be able to improve schools ourselves, and what is it that we have some control over. And eventually, if we can do it one school at a time, I think some politician somewhere is probably going to want to take credit for it. And
Absolutely.
should probably let them at that point, let the baby have their bottle, so to speak. And I think that one of the reasons that we've stagnated, and I know there's been some, obviously acutely aware of the challenges of the pandemic over the last few years, but I think that what does happen when we have challenges and we have problems and we have difficulties come along is that we focus incessantly on them. And so it's like, how do we deal with this? Or I can't because of that. And what that does is it takes teachers out of their best creative space. So we need first, in terms of what are we going to do about it, is to identify the scope that we do have. So we have to look at areas that we can make a difference, such that somehow my school will collectively be turned around, become a lighthouse, get noticed by that politician, and allow them to take credit for it and want to scale it across the community. So that narrows our focus. We've got a big ambition, sure, but it narrows our focus down to what does every teacher in their classroom have the scope to transform? What are the areas that every teacher has the permission to transform? And if we can look at that, then we can get some local change that'll help our teachers, help every teacher watching this to be a little bit more effective and a little less stressed. And that's something that I think personally we should be aiming for at the moment.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think often teachers, and I think everyone, we have perceived limitation, which are not real.
Yeah.
And teachers actually have much more autonomy than they think and much more power than they believe. And so they can really make a difference and teach differently, even though they can still, teach their curriculum, but in a completely different way, in a different framework that enable them to create that rich and nurturing learning environment that our children need. And I know that you are doing some work in this area. Can you share some of your insights in terms of the thing that teachers can change straight away, right, from today or tomorrow in their classroom to make to turn it into a much better environment for their students?
Yeah, I certainly can. And I think you're right too, that what we think we've got is a situation where teachers are unaware of the areas that they can change. And I want to suggest to you that there's probably 3 key areas that teachers can change. One is language. Okay, so it's about what are the words that we bring to the learning environment. And I'll tell you more about that. The second would be architecture. The basic architecture of a classroom has gone unchanged and unchallenged for so long. It's kind of strange. And I think it gives students the impression sometimes that it's another place that they'll fail. So we do have some scope over architecture, and also around, for instance, how we handle conflict and wrongdoing. And we know that teachers stress the factor that still sits at the top of the teacher stress hierarchies when we look at the research around it is student conduct and student behaviour. And there are different ways that we can handle that in the classroom that can be more effective. And I'm really happy to work you through that. But I do want to labour that point that you've made there, Audel, a little bit about how teachers do have scope to change all of those 3 areas. And principals also have the opportunity to permit their teachers to do that. So if teachers can actually say, well, I'm going to run a little action research project here for the next 5 weeks about how I'm going to change the classroom architecture. If they go to their principal with my people always knew, go to Adam with a good story and a good business case, and he'll say yes, he'll give you permission. If you can go with a good story and a good case for change, I think most principals are really keen to say yes. But at the moment, we don't have teachers asking for that permission. Therefore, we don't have principals giving it. And teachers can operate differently in all 3 of those domains and make their lives a lot easier.
Absolutely. So we definitely encourage teachers to take an initiative. And like you said, if they present it in a way that shows the principal the benefit that the school would have and the students and the teachers as well, as they'll be impacted positively by these changes, then most likely that principal would say yes. But I want us to touch on the 3 points you mentioned. And can we start with the language? You mentioned about changing the language within the classroom. Can you dive deeper into that?
I can. So one of the things that we advise at Real Schools in a restorative model is that we use what we call affective language. So not effective, but affective language, which is pretty much, it's to break it down to its most basic. It's say what you were already going to say, but throw in a feelings word. So if you see a student do something negative, for instance, drop a piece of rubbish on the ground, we've all got pretty strong defaults around that. We might say things like, hey, pick that up. If you can just insert an affective word, such as disappoints me to see you do that, put it in the bin. Now, really, we're saying the same, we're using one breath to give a sentence. It's the same, maybe a quarter of a second of your time. But the word that I would say everyone watching this video heard loudest is the word disappointed. And that enacts both the neocortex of the brain, which is where we store our language, but also our limbic system, which is our emotional center, which means that better and deeper learning is happening. As a result, we get students, we sort of tilt the odds, a little more slightly in the favor of that student picking up the rubbish. But we also provide them with information. And with enough information about what works and what doesn't work in our culture, they can actually start to learn to self-regulate through the building of emotional intelligence and empathy, which is really exciting, because we then don't have to tell kids as often that we're disappointed because that kid puts a piece of rubbish in the bin and we get to walk over to them and say, delighted to see you do that. Effective word.
It's a strong word, disappointed.
It is. And the only thing, we want kids to know when things disappoint them and disappoint others and when they don't. So the only rule about using effective language is tell the truth. We don't need to mayo it up. We don't need to sugarcoat it. Just tell them the truth, because then they get accurate information that they can use to do a little bit of higher order thinking, and they can predict what behaviours are going to work for them in that environment. We had one school who focused really heavily on this for a 12-month period with the theory that this would increase creativity in young people if you're enacting both the neocortex and the limbic system of their brain. And at the end of the year, they presented me with a framed piece of artwork from a 5-year-old girl and her creative writing piece. And all they had done, these teachers this year, was teach a new effective word to the students every week and try to get busy on using those effective words informally in their language. And the writing was a creative piece about a worm on a driveway, and the worm got half run over by mum's car.
Oh, no.
And apparently the worm was perturbed. Now, not quite the right word, but I don't know how many other 5-year-olds are putting the word perturbed. in their creative writing pieces. This builds a wonderful emotional intelligence that's valuable not just when they've got rubbish in their hands. It's valuable for their learning as well. And we have hundreds of opportunities every day to speak that way in our learning environments and change the culture that our kids are growing in.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to expand the words we use around emotions, because there was one research that was done and they checked how many words people know or express regarding their emotion. And there were only 5 emotions that people actually identify. But the variety and the range of emotion is so broad. So, for example, disappointed is one of them. And so if you expose children to a variety of words you use to express different emotions, then it helps them with a self-regulation, understanding their own feeling and emotion, and also having empathy for others. So it's very powerful, that the use of effective words, as you mentioned.
Exactly right. There's a lot of secondary teachers I speak to out there who are pretty tired of their students thinking that the only 3 impacts they can have on people are happy, sad, and angry.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's more to it than that.
Yeah, much
Yeah.
more. And can you touch on the second point, which you mentioned about the architecture in the classroom?
So classroom architecture, and again, as part of our model at Real Schools, we speak a lot to the use of circle architecture. So what that does is it takes the teacher out of the authoritarian position at the front of the room, as often as we possibly can. There are times when kids need to demo and they need to see the things that are on the board or on the smart board or on a screen, but not always. Most topics actually require a little bit of discussion and synthesis. And so what we suggest is create space in your learning environment for a circle to happen, where a teacher is just participating rather than trying to force participation, where a teacher is contributing rather than performing at the front of the room. We're not performing SEALs. We do not need to stand at the front of the room and put on a show in order to have these kids learn. So we've had some teachers, for instance, a fabulous year 8 teacher that we work with who actually has transformed the permanent architecture of her room to circles. If she needs something else, she changes it back. She has pushed the tables back to the edge of the room and put the chairs inside the tables. When the students walk into the room, they sit down facing a wall.
Oh, wow.
But as soon as she sits down at the front of the room on a chair, she says to the students, just turn your chair around, please, everyone. Instant circle.
Yeah.
They talk about the topic of the day. They talk about why they should learn about it. They talk about the tasks. They talk about the supports they've got. And they talk about how long they need to get the work done. And what she is reporting is that she doesn't have to repeat herself anymore. She's because she's not just performing at the front of the room anymore. She's also reporting that they're year 8, so she can see what's on their laptops when she's walking around the room, what you can't see when they're in rows with your class set up like a battlefield. And I asked her at the end of the day, how did it feel to teach that way? And she said, I feel guilty. And
why is that?
I said, and I did the same. I said, why is that? And she said, because I've never sat so much in a day. I've never talked so little. And I've never watched the students get so much done.
Wow.
When we're at the front of the room, we do all the heavy lifting. We're trying to, as she said, trying to drag the students like in a sack through the curriculum, hoping some of it sticks to them. But we do all the effort. Our students are asking to be engaged. Let's use architecture in the classroom that's more likely to get them active in their learning.
Absolutely. And what you're talking about here, Adam, is it actually requires a big shift in the mindset within teachers, because, we've been used to teach, being a teacher, right? Yeah. So you're there at the front of the room, you are the sage holding all the information and just passing it down to your students. And what you're talking about is a big shift in mindset from being a teacher to becoming a facilitator of learning, where you basically learn alongside your students.
Yeah.
So you picking up a topic or a subject and you're learning together. And I think this is probably the challenging part for teachers, for many teachers, to make that shift from being that teacher that holding all the knowledge to being a facilitator and allowing the students to lead the learning process.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that I want to respect how challenging that is for teachers. And I don't think there's another profession where we become the teacher that we've spent 11 years watching. So we, from the age of 4 or 5, are building a picture in our head of what teachers must do.
Yeah.
And it's not an accurate picture. We're allowed, as experts who've done university qualifications, and some of us have decades of experience in the classroom, we're allowed to challenge that picture.
Absolutely.
We're
And
allowed
we
to say, "Oh,
should.
the
We
word
should
differently."
challenge this picture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Because no one else will. No one else has our expertise. They've spent their 11 years building in their head what a teacher must do. We're the ones that have more knowledge than that. We can challenge that.
Absolutely. And in order to drive change, a meaningful change, and we can see it clearly in other industries, we have to break the status quo. And one of the status quo is the teacher that holding all the knowledge and passing it down to the
That's right.
students.
Yeah, we're not knowledge sprinklers. We don't need to stand at the front of the room sort of spraying our students, hoping that there's better ways to work. Yeah.
And it will help with student engagement, because I hear from my children who attend school about the frustration they have when a teacher needs to repeat and repeats the same thing over and over again. They get frustrated and bored.
That's right.
And then they get disengaged from learning.
There's no requirement of a student when a teacher is performing at the front of the room like a rock star, and you can be rock star good, but there's no requirement of the student to listen.
Absolutely.
All you've got to do is look like you're listening. Or you know what? Most teachers will cop it if a student's sitting there like this as well.
Yeah.
You know? doesn't mean they're learning or engaging. We can make it easier than that. Yeah.
For sure, for sure. And let's jump into the third point that you mentioned about handling conflict. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think you need to sort of step back from what do I do with conflict and wrongdoing and say, well, what sort of a system is a school? You know, and when I ask educators what sort of a system, what do you want your school to be built around? What sort of system should we be? They'll say, well, we should be a collaborative system. We should be a learning system. We should be a student-centered system. Yet when it comes to conflict and wrongdoing, our default is to employ a judicial system, a crime and punishment system, which means that what we do is we're focused on blame through the belief that our students will get better and we will deter behaviours that are problematic from happening if we can get the punishment right. Okay? And what that leads to for teachers is having students come back in from recess having had some sort of squabble, and then they need to launch what I call education CSI, where they spend an hour investigating like they're detectives in a judicial system, so that they can eventually make a judgment that they will never, ever get right. You will always have 15 different versions of the story. And then somehow you've got to come up with some sort of judgment of a penalty. What do we know about kids, whether they have been penalised accurately or inaccurately? They sit in the penalty doing three things. One is they demonise the authority figure who put them there. So your relationship with the students gets worse. Secondly, is they plot revenge against anybody who provided an unfavourable testimony.
Yeah.
And the third thing they do with that time while they're detained or suspended is that they scheme ways to get away with the same behaviour the next time round. So this is entirely unproductive thinking for a learning cooperative system. Yeah. So what we say in our model is, instead of basing the whole thing in past for the purpose of judgment, move the conversation from past to present to future as quickly as you possibly can, with the view that we can take the students from wrongdoing into shame, because that's what we feel when we screw up, into releasing that shame by being thanked and congratulated for taking responsibility. So we say, give me a gist. That's a really technical word, isn't it? Give me a gist of what happened between you two. And if I think I can get it, right, sorry. So can I just check before we go investigating this forever? Am I right that you two went outside and you had an argument over playing handball? Eventually some nasty words were said and it got a little bit physical in the end. Is that right? And if they go, well, yeah, okay. Second question, present-based. How is this making you two feel? Well, it's making me angry and it's making me feel frightened. Geez, that's no good. We can't have that in our school. What are you going to do about that? How could you un-anger? And a lot of our teachers that we work with use that prefix. So if you've made someone angered or frightened, your job is to un-anger them or unfrighten them. Yeah. What are you going to do to fix that up? And we get them out of banal fake apologies, and we get them out of the need to lie, because we're not trying to mitigate the chance of a negative outcome on ourselves. It's just about how quickly we can get to the point where you fix this up and you get thanked by an authority figure like me, and you get to move on better positioned to do the right thing next time round.
Yeah. This is very powerful. Yeah.
That methodology can be used to minor infractions, but it can actually be used when students get things really seriously wrong as well. You just need to put a little bit more time into it. But the time factor for me is really important, because what I can say about practicing restoratively is that my experience and the experience of the 125 partner schools that we work with is that they save time.
Yeah.
Because recidivism actually goes down.
And also another thing I love about it is that you pass some responsibility to them. They're part of the solution, right? You're not deciding yourself, okay, what we're going to do about it now. They are part of it, right? They need to find a solution and a way forward from this situation. So basically you're empowering them to solve a problem, to solve a conflict,
I think that's my favorite part of it. I always channel a group of girls that I worked with when I was a principal who were constantly coming to me because of friendship group problems. And we used a methodology called P3, P3, F3, just on a piece of paper. 3 minutes for the past, 3 minutes for the present, 3 minutes for the future. That's all we're doing. And I noticed they stopped coming. And I thought, they're just avoiding me because they don't get to get out of a class now, And so I saw them sitting on the concrete one day, and I walked over and said, "Morning, girls, how are you?" And they said, "Morning, Mr. Voigt." And I said, "Haven't seen you for a P3, P3, F3 lately." I said, "Yeah, you don't need it anymore." And they said, "No, we still do it. There's one over there." And they'd actually done it in chalk on the concrete.
Wow.
So for me, I've watched year one students do this. I have no idea when we step back from it. I have no idea why as teachers, all the way through to senior secondary, we are resolving conflict for these students.
Absolutely.
When all they need to do is learn 3 steps.
Yes.
It's only a 3-step process. Do it yourself. Hand over responsibility to them.
Exactly. And you know what? I think teachers would be relieved to have such a method to resolve conflict, because I hear from teachers often that they're fed up with dealing with the problems in the schoolyard and dealing with conflict and behavior issue. They can't stand it, It's not something they enjoy doing, and it's taking a toll on their well-being.
Absolutely.
And so by moving away from resolving conflict and dealing with who said what, who did what, and all of that into such method to resolve conflict, they will benefit greatly from that, the teachers themselves as well.
It's my most stolen artifact, P3, P3, F3. And I think that's great. I think I'm a firm believer that great teaching is 90% theft. So take something good that's out there, challenge the picture that we've built in our head about the way we must handle conflict or wrongdoing. We don't have to handle it that way. And again, that's wanted to loop back to where we started, that a teacher that goes to a principal with a really good story and a really good plan for how they're going to handle conflict, and I'd like to report back in 5 weeks on my findings, I think most principals will say yes to that. Let's do it differently. Let's see what happens.
Yes, and definitely. And another thing that I think it's important to share with teacher is the need to share it with the rest of the team, right? With their colleagues, share what they're doing, and share their journey with them. So when they try something new within their classroom and with their students, share with the rest how it's working, what's working well, what might not work well, and how other teachers can adopt these different ways of thinking and teaching to create a better learning environment in their own classroom.
I think it's a great idea to deprivatise really good practice in our schools. Nobody's losing from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Adam. It's been a pleasure having you, and thank you for all the valuable wisdom that you shared and different ways to think differently about how we teach our students and how we facilitate the learning within our classroom. I really hope that many teachers will take that on board and tell that story to their principal and start driving this amazing learning environment from tomorrow. So thank you very much for your time, Adam.
My pleasure. I hope the same thing.